Okay, so I'm just going to reload the page. Okay, so this I've written before. Let me just try to increase the font a bit. Okay, let me increase the font of the VS Code too. Okay, so I'm going to change this to 2, H2. Okay. Okay, I forgot to save it. Okay, all right. So JavaScript promises. Promises are better ways to undo asynchronous requests in JavaScript. They are used to undo asynchronous requests. The request that other functions in the application relies on, that without the request the other functions won't execute successfully. So, and they need to wait for the data that is being returned from the request. So that's where JavaScript promises comes in. So they are used to access the network or disk, to communicate with web workers and service workers, and even a timer, like set interval stuff. So it is used in those ways. All right, so let's look at and okay, now let's go straight into it. All right, so this is the HTML that I've created. It's just normal HTML, and the index.js. As of now, there's nothing in it now. So how do we create promises? For example, I'm just going to use fetch, and I'm going to be requesting an API that returns electricity map. Though we are not going to be doing much with it. I'm just going to be getting the zones of the country zones, the country electricity zones. Okay, so and I'm going to be using fetch to fetch the API. So if you know fetch is also a promise. So it return so dot then. I'm going to explain the dot then just in a moment. So this is going to get the response, and it's going to return a JSON response. It's going to pass the response into a JSON, and dot then. I'm using JavaScript arrow function, ES6 arrow function. Okay, so and then I can now log it. I can log it here. I can just log the data here. Let me just log the data. And let's say, for example, the data is defined here as null. So, and I want to use the data that is being returned from this API. I want to use it later, or down here. Like I want to log it down here. So how do we do that? And this data has to be gotten from the API, and it's going to take some time for the data to be returned from the API. So, and how do we wait for the data to be returned? And okay, let's test this out in JavaScript. I'm just going to open the console, Ctrl Shift K. All right, so I will reload the page now. I'm going to reload the page now, and I can see is not logging anything. All right, so I'm just going to say initial value. All right, so I'm making a mistake here. I forgot to include it in the HTML. So index.js. All right, so I'm just going to save all. Okay, so now let me reload the page. So what's the value that we okay let me just remove this stuff here. Okay, so the value that we want is not this initial value. We want the data that is being returned from this electricity map API. But this console.log was executed before this fetch API returns the data. So, and that's where JavaScript Promises comes in. So JavaScript Promises, it will pause the code. It will pause it till the data is being returned from the API. And let me just test this out and make it return here. So this is the response that was returned. And this response that was returned here is supposed to be returned here as the initial value. So that's where we are going to need JavaScript promise. All right, so I'm just going to put it in a function. I'm going to call it function get data. It's not going to take any arguments. Okay, so what are we now going to do? We are going to return promise. JavaScript promises promise return new promise. Then it's going to take two parameters. The first is resolve, and the resolve callback function, and the second is reject. So it's going to return a callback function here. So it is in the callback function that we are going to provide the parameters. So the resolve stands for if the request was successful, and the reject stands for if any error occurs while the request was being sent. So that's where the reject is that's where we're going to run the reject function. All right, so now it is in the promise function now. All right, so let's say now it was successful. The request was successful. Now if we got into this .then function, then the request was successful, and we are going to resolve the value. All right, so we can resolve the value here after calling the resolve value. So it will jump out of the whole function and it will resolve. So, and what if an error occurred? So we can get that with .catch. So ES6 arrow function error. What if an error occurred? Then it's going to reject. And how do we use this function now? that returns a promise. Now if I put the cursor over the name of the function, as you can see, it says promise. It returns promise. So how do we use it? Coming down here, I'm going to say get data. I'm going to call the function. Then I'm going to use the then. So the then can take two callback functions. The first one is going to be if it was being resolved successfully. Then the data that was passing, we can return the data by passing in the data into the resolve function, and we can pass in the error into the reject function here. So this parameter here is coming from this data that we pass in here. So we are going to get it with the parameter here. All right, so we can just say data. All right, then the second callback function here is going to be if an error occur and it was rejected from the promise function. So I'm just going to say function, then error. We know that it's going to be an error that is going to be returned, and now we can now log the error, and if it is data, we can log the data. All right, so all right, now we can test it out in the browser. Right, if I just let me save it. All right, it has reloaded by itself. All right, so you see, I'm just going to log another data here. Request successful, and here I'm going to say requests not successful. So okay, so and here I'm going to log something here to indicate when the result was resolved. I'm going to say resolving. Okay, done requesting the data, resolving, and here I'm going to just log an error occurred, rejecting. Okay, so we can go back to the browser, save, and go back to the browser, and as you can see, done requesting the data and request successful. So this stuff that was logged here, I can see it is on the line 20. So it is this data that was logged in this then data. So it is the successful data that was logged. So if I just try to let me cause an error by removing the P in front of the map. So all right, so as you can see, it says type error, network error when attempting to fetch resources. So this actually not the error, but is indicating that an error occurred. So I can see an error occurred, rejecting, and the stuff here on line 24. line 24 in the error callback function, which says network error when attempting to fetch resources. Request not successful. So you can do a lot of things here in the error callback function by displaying a message to the user, or by by using alert, or by doing a lot of stuffs, or by calling the get data function again to retry, by saying like something like get data again to retry the request. So, and there's another way that you can use the get data function by saying get data dot then. So dot then, and a callback function here. So data that is going to be returned, and I'm just going to log its data, and I'm going to copy this thing here. Let's console.log here and say successful, and dot catch. We can also call the dot catch function. It will, okay, let me just use the normal function. So it's going to do the same thing that the error callback function was doing here. So it's going to do the same thing that the error callback function is doing here, and I'm just going to copy it here and paste it. All right, so if I save now and go back to the browser, I can see it's doing the same thing. Like, all right, so index.js on line 32. So I can see on line 32. So now let's try the resolve function. I'm just going to pull the p back and save. I can see done requesting the data, resolving, and it's logged the request, and it says request successful. So if I just view this now, right, so this was the response that was gotten from the request. All right, so this is one of the simple ways to use JavaScript Promise. There is also other stuff like promise dot all. The promise dot all is used to check if all the promises, we are going to pass in two promises like var promise 1. That's going to be new promise, then the callback function, then callback function, then promise 2, then the callback function, and we are going to pass in the both promise here, promise 1 and promise 2, and it will resolve only if the both of the promises was fulfilled. If the both of these promises was fulfilled, so it will resolve. If one of these both promises rejected, so it will reject. It will cause an error and reject. So there are a lot of stuff that there are a lot of applications that I can use, that I can apply JavaScript promises. So this is one of the ways that I can use JavaScript promises. So it will make this it will also make this function to be reusable. It will make it to be reusable. Like instead of me to be calling this fetch function every time, so I will just call the get data function from anywhere in this script. I can call it from anywhere in this script instead of repeating this fetch every time I need to fetch data from the API. So that's that's one of the ways to use promise. And instead of using it in a function, you can use it alone, like this, like new, so new promise, then the callback function, resolve, then reject. So